without further ado, Alisa, great to see you.
Thanks, Kara, and to all the SiHer Summit organizers for inviting me to speak here today. I'm really grateful for events like this one that prioritize the amplification of underrepresented voices in all spheres, including Web3. So thank you for having me here today. Let's see, I'm not sure how I can get my slides up on the screen. There we go, perfect. So this is a really exciting time in human history. Every so often, a new technology emerges that transforms the economic power grid and the old order of human affairs in ways that are both profound and quite unexpected. And this pattern has recurred throughout history, from the printing press to the steam engine, the television, computer, and most recently, the internet. So now we're in this very interesting period where there's not one technology emerging, but four, and they're all kind of hitting their stride at the exact same moment. The first is blockchain, the second is AI, the third is IoT, or the Internet of Things, and the fourth is extended reality. And I'm here to tell you today that these technologies are not separate, they're related. So in the same way that the term internet went from describing a really narrow set of networking technologies to describing a whole range of technologies, but also new business models, new social behaviors, and new cultural phenomenon, so too is the term Web3 coming to describe this next era, with all four of these technologies converging together. So let's start with the core concept here. So for 30 years, we've had an internet of information. So when you send and move and share information online, what you're really sending is a copy. But when it comes to things that have value, things like money or other assets, being able to create copies is a terrible idea, because if I can copy money and assets the same way that I can copy information, those assets basically become worthless. So this is the crux of the double spend problem. And traditionally, the double spend problem was solved through intermediaries, things like banks or big tech companies. But there were, of course, several drawbacks. They're centralized, making them vulnerable to hacking and attack. They add costs and fees and friction. They harvest our personal data for their own gain. And Bitcoin, for all the hype and hoopla that came with it, was designed to solve this very problem. It was designed to be a way for one person to move value over the internet to another person without the need for an intermediary. And what was remarkable about Bitcoin was that it actually worked. And unlike all previous attempts that came before it, in 2008, Bitcoin actually worked in solving the double spend problem. And this set off a spark that captured the imagination of people in many industries, not just finance, but every single industry in the economy. So the internet is entering a new era, and with it, the web is entering a new era. And I know that sounds a bit redundant, but let me clarify what I mean. So the internet was invented in the 1960s as a project of the US government to build a communication network that could stay up and running in the event of a nuclear attack. But it wasn't until the 1990s that the internet became commercialized, thanks to the invention of the World Wide Web. So the first era of the web was the read web, a medium for the presentation of static information on websites. And it was primitive by today's standards, but it nevertheless did something profound, which is that it democratized access to information for anyone who had an internet connection. So no matter where you were in the world, if you typed the same URL, you would get the same information. And something like that was not possible before. The second era of the web brought about the era of user-generated content. So no longer was the web a place to just consume content. It was a way for people to share content and to connect online. And what the second era of the web allowed was the democratization of publishing. So all of a sudden, people could post their photos, share their thoughts on world events, become a citizen astronomer, and so on. And the Web 2 era created this new asset class, data, user-generated content. And it's a cliche that data is the new oil, but it's true. So data is the most important asset class of the digital age. The only problem was we created all this data, but we didn't own it. It was owned by the social media platforms and the big tech companies that we interacted with. And what ended up happening in Web 2 is that the big killer business model basically became advertising. And so platforms worked really hard to keep people hooked with recommendation engines to gather more data so they could sell more ads. And that was problematic for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest is that we, as internet users, didn't get to participate in any of that value creation. So enter Web3, the read, write, own web, enabled by blockchain. So now, not only is the web a way to access content or publish your own content, but with the integration of wallet technology, it's a platform that will allow us to own and manage our identities, our data, to control our own assets, and to be able to monetize our own digital creations. So at the very core of this are assets. And at BRI, we hear from a lot of business leaders this question about cryptocurrencies. I don't understand why we need so many cryptocurrencies. What are all these cryptocurrencies for? And I think the term currencies is a bit misleading. Most digital assets are not currencies or even trying to be currencies. In order for something to be a currency, it needs to be a store of value, a medium of exchange, a unit of account. The US dollar is a currency. The euro is a currency. Bitcoin is trying to be a currency. But the vast majority of digital assets aren't trying to be currencies per se. So the best way to think about digital assets or tokens is as containers for value. So in the same way that a shipping container can contain anything from furniture to clothing to canned goods, a token can be programmed to contain anything from organ donor consent to healthcare proxy designation to data licensing terms and so on. Anything digital that has value. And what's really remarkable is that because tokens are software-based, they can include additional programming logic surrounding their use. So in the keynote right after this, Amna Chowdhury is going to share more about the power of tokenization. So I'm excited to hear her speak more about this topic very soon. So at BRI, we have this token taxonomy, and we keep adding more and more categories. Right now, there's 11. I'm not going to go through each of these, but what's important to note is that currencies is just one of 11 different types of tokens. And a taxonomy like this might be sort of useful now, but I think pretty soon having a taxonomy of digital assets will seem kind of silly. It would sort of be like having a taxonomy of websites. So in the 1990s, people were asking themselves, what can I do with a website? Maybe we can make a newspaper or classifieds or an encyclopedia. But of course, today we know that websites are also like containers. You can have a website be pretty much anything. So I think eventually a token taxonomy like this will seem kind of silly, but maybe now it's sort of useful. So why is it that when a new technology comes along, really successful companies have a hard time embracing it or can't figure out how to manage the transformation? So you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and you see a new technology come along, say AI, and you ask, okay, AI, how can you help me do things differently? Well, maybe AI will help me replace the people in my call centers, or maybe blockchains will help me reduce the complexity of my business transactions, or maybe extended reality will allow me to open a bank branch in the metaverse or something. This is how legacy businesses are thinking about new technologies. How will it solve my existing problems 10% cheaper or 10% faster? But oftentimes the way that a technology changes industries is much more profound than just cutting costs and making things incrementally more efficient. Usually they create something new that we haven't anticipated before. And what's interesting about all the technologies of Web3 is that they're all basically hitting their stride at the same time. And I think from the outside looking in, some technologies can seem like an overnight success story. So ChatGPT is the ultimate example of this. So in November 2022, people were saying, wow, AI, it just came out of nowhere. This is a really big deal. But of course, AI has been many, many decades in the making. So in reality, these things take time. So what does this mean for industries? So for the sake of time, I'm going to focus on these four. So let's start with financial services. This is a Rube Goldberg machine. It's this complicated apparatus that performs many steps, and all of them are totally unnecessary because in the end, all a Rube Goldberg machine does is a very simple task, like crack an egg or flip a switch or something like that. And this is basically the way the financial services industry works today. So if you go into Starbucks and tap your card on the card reader, you might think, wow, look at that. The money is moving digitally from my wallet to their device. But it's not. It's going through a payment gateway, the credit card network, your bank, the merchant's bank. And in the end, it doesn't settle instantly. It takes a couple of days and it costs about 1 to 10% in fees. The CEO of Corapay, Dixon Nosifor, commented that it's faster to physically drive money from Nigeria to Ghana than it is to send a wire transfer. Because with a wire, the money would first have to go to New York and then to London before coming back to Africa, and it takes days. So it's such a strange concept. When you use the web to send an email, you get it instantly. But if I buy a stock or if I want to send money to another country, it takes days or weeks and costs all of these ridiculous fees. So in contrast to fintech, which is basically like digital wallpaper on the existing financial services industry, what's interesting about DeFi, or decentralized finance, is that DeFi is trying to reimagine every aspect of what the financial services industry does. Not just how we move value, but also how we store value, how we access credit, how we connect entrepreneurs with investors, how we do insurance, how we exchange assets, and so on. And DeFi today is relatively small. I think the total asset value that's in the ecosystem is less than $100 billion, which sounds like a big number, but it isn't when you think about how big the financial industry is. But some very smart leaders in the banking world are paying attention. And what's unique about DeFi is that all of the applications in each of these 9 different sectors, they're not being spearheaded by some traditional company. Usually it starts with a DAO or a user-owned network, and it's a lot more grassroots. Now, we tend to think of Web3 or blockchain as a financial technology, but it isn't. So I'll give you another example, physical infrastructure. And what's fascinating about Web3 is that we can use the concept of DAOs or user-owned networks to bootstrap projects that tackle the most entrenched industries. So I already described financial services. Another one is physical infrastructure. So imagine a world where there are billions of people, countless companies, smart contracts, autonomous AI agents, and connected devices all needing to transact, to prove identity, to move and store value, to coordinate in real time. That kind of thing is not going to happen using the Visa network or existing tech companies. And so what Web3 pioneers are doing is building user-owned networks for physical infrastructure, cloud networks, wireless networks, sensor networks, energy networks. There are at least 150 projects in the world of Web3 that are doing exactly this. So I'll share a couple of examples. There's a project called Render Network, which enables individuals and businesses to pool their computing resources into a decentralized graphics processing unit rendering platform. So AI companies and film studios can then use these computing resources for tasks like AI model training or rendering complex 3D animations. So the users of these networks benefit from reduced computing costs, and the owners of the GPUs earn additional passive income. There's another project called HiveMapper, which aims to challenge Google Maps' monopoly by leveraging dash cams installed in everyday vehicles to map the world much more rapidly and with far greater detail than a Google truck ever could. All you need is a few hundred cars on the road in a city like New York, and you can map the city every few weeks. In 1 year, HiveMapper has already mapped 10% of the world's surface, or 8 million kilometers of roadway, and it has surpassed Google Maps data quality in cities like New York, Seoul, and Los Angeles. So big tech companies like Apple and Microsoft have spent billions of dollars to try and compete with Google Maps and have pretty much failed. But with Web3 technology, a bunch of users can get together and potentially do it themselves. So at the beginning of my remarks, I talked about Web3 as the intersection of 4 technologies, including AI. So AI has gone through many cycles of excitement and disillusionment, but we're now at a key moment when AI has taken center stage. So what's the relationship between AI, blockchain, and these other technologies? Well, it turns out that every single layer of the AI stack, there's an opportunity to make things better by integrating these technologies. So starting from the bottom, the first is hardware. So right now, all these AI models are being run on NVIDIA chips, which are owned by very large cloud providers. So decentralized infrastructure or DePIN networks provide more choice and adds more balance and competition to that market. The second are the models themselves. So despite its name, OpenAI is anything but open. And what we need for AI models, if they're going to be that important or that transformational, is better governance. We need a way to have transparency and accountability, and we can't do that in the closed systems that we have today. The third is data. So right now, big tech companies have all the data, but in a Web3 world, users would own and control their own data. So they'll get to decide how that data gets used, whether it's to train an AI model or otherwise. And then, of course, there's huge opportunities to integrate AI with distributed applications or dApps. So take DeFi, for example. You could have a financial advisor that's actually a smart AI that could find the best investment opportunities and help you move and store money, all without the need for banks or traditional intermediaries. The final industry I'm going to talk about is arts and culture. So the business model in this industry has changed over time. In the medieval days, the business model was basically patronage. So if you were an artist, you needed to find a patron. And a lot of times your art reflected the ambitions and desires of your patron. Then in the 20th century, that model changed. Now you could sell your creative work to an audience of many. So if you were an author, you could sell a paperback. If you were a musician, you could sell a record or a CD. And by earning a small amount for the sale of many units, you could earn a decent living. Now, the first two eras of the web, Web 1 and later Web 2, were supposed to make this better for creators. Because now if you're a musician, you could sell your music directly to a fan, peer-to-peer. Except that's not what happened. What happened was that this thing that was an asset, such as a song or a record that you sold units of, was essentially shared and copied the same way as information. It got put through the printing press of the web until its value was basically worthless. And a whole new set of intermediaries stepped in, things like Spotify or Apple Music or streaming platforms. But overall, artists got paid less on average than they ever had before. Now, on top of this, we have the rise of AI. And what we're seeing happen in Web 2 is that intellectual property is being used to train AI models without the consent of the creator. And also, the rapid spread of deepfake content underscores the need for robust mechanisms to ensure the authenticity of digital content. So how can we ensure artists and creators are compensated fairly for their work? And how do we verify the authenticity of the content we consume? So the good news is that IP is an asset and it can be tokenized. And this is essentially what NFTs are. So the NFT space has had its ups and downs, to be sure. But the big idea is that through tokenization, digital content can be authenticated and tracked, and it can empower creators to embed specific permissions or usage rights and even royalty percentages into their creative works. So this is the way we're able to scale AI and culture responsibly in the Web3 era. So they say that technology makes the world a flatter place. And I think that's always been a bit more of a promise than reality. I think the world today is a very deeply unequal place, and there are lots of complex reasons for that. But I also think it's true that technology has enriched the world and has spread opportunity. So if Web 1 democratized access to information and Web 2 democratized access to publishing, Web 3 empowers people with a new toolkit to move and store value, to own assets, and to build wealth on a more globally level playing field and in a more globally level labor market. And as participants in the SiHer Summit, you've all come here today because you've self-selected to understand this space a little bit better, or maybe because you're already a leader in this field. So it doesn't matter if you're a student or a seasoned business professional or someone between careers. Anybody who cares about the future and maybe wants to play a role shaping it needs to understand what's happening. So together, we have the power to drive meaningful change. Let us embrace this responsibility with courage, empathy, and